that spiritual world, a lot of people who have not fully differentiated their egos as a solid human being, different from all the other individuals. And a lot of us who have been traumatized in childhood, which is, probably, 9/10 of us, are very
Right.
attracted to these spiritual approaches that have us disappear ourselves into nothingness, into consciousness, to transcend the human experience as a form of enlightenment. But I later learned that to transcend, one needs a solid sense of self. You can't give away an ego you haven't fully formed.
Right.
So it ended up being a community of, really wonderful, kind, amazing, brilliant people who had missed some very fundamental developmental chapters in their life, and who were therefore either giving their power away way too easily or putting their power on top of people way too easily. It's the same coin there, because it's a
Right.
power or power under, right? So it could be highly toxic in these communities that, we're all about peace and love and joy and freedom. And again, there was this incongruence for me about but this is supposed to be peace, love, joy, freedom. And yet we're not talking about the planet. We're not putting our feet in the soil. We're not embodied. What do we do with the human body if it's just an illusion,
Right.
So that kind of led in some directions that weren't necessarily, they were good teaching moments. I'll just put it that way.
Sure.
The whole picture. And I did suffer at the hands of some really intense narcissistic folks and sociopathic folks. And that's not to say that the spiritual communities aren't worth spending time with. It's an important part of the human puzzle, is our connection to the divine. Having said that, it is fraught with some very unsavory personality dynamics.
I don't want to interrupt your story, and I'll certainly cue you to go back into it here in a moment, but I do just have to throw out there how profound I think this piece is that you're sharing. It is something that is not talked about.
Nope.
And is so real and
Yep.
is so felt. And I actually had a conversation with my therapist about a year ago, or maybe less than a year ago, when I was, kind of in one of these communities, and it was really deeply activating for a lot of the pieces of myself that I was like, I'm really working to heal this, and there's something that's just coming up and mucking it up, and there's all these things. And my therapist was like, she in her wisdom was like, I couldn't tell you exactly what it is or why it is, but in these communities there is a draw for narcissism. There is a draw for people who, regardless of your kind of belief on whether it's predisposed to having these traits or, learned, or to no fault of a person's own. But when you have that experience, there is this tie there, and we need to be mindful of it as people who are trying to, like you said, it align with the divine sense of our human experience, while also getting really clear about we're embodied, we're human beings in this incarnation, in this iteration. That can't be ignored either. So I just have all the respect in the world for you sharing that. And I think too, this way that, we hear love and light, love and light, love and light. Light casts a shadow, and we cannot ignore that either. So thank you for including that. I'll hand it back over to you with your story here.
Absolutely. And we can go right down any rabbit hole there, because, for a good, let's see, I headed to India when I was 28, and I would say for a good a good 25 years, I was, you wouldn't have known it had you known me, because I produced a magazine. I was a mom of two amazing kids, and, and I always presented like this. But what I can tell you is that I was like wrestling with these really, really intense
Yeah.
pathologies, and I'll say it that way, and the denial that is around these pathologies and these personas, because people need and want their guru, they need and want their spiritual teacher, they need and want their spiritual community, and so it's a no touch zone. So it can be a very lonely kind of, and you can throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I didn't want to, because the baby was the very sacred, precious, important spiritual path. But it was surrounded in this bathwater of just awful, traumatizing, toxic stuff. And I look back now, and we talked about in the beginning about like this gratitude molecule, and I'm so grateful I have that. And I'm another molecule I have that I didn't make happen, is that I will be broken open by things, not broken by things. I will take anything and turn it into a learning opportunity so I can grow. And who I got to become as a result of these very, very toxic situations is like so precious. So I'm grateful. And, it's powerful enough that I've often thought I should write a book, because I was in the living rooms of all these very famous people who you see in the bookstores. I was there. I saw everything with my own eyes. And I feel it needs to be exposed, but in a way that doesn't provoke people to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Which requires quite some titration, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of in my 30s, 40s, I was I was living in Australia. I was really suffering from the consequences of being inside many of these communities. And I had pretty much thrown the baby out with the bathwater. I'd become quite cynical. I was mad at God. I just pretty much hated everybody. and it was bitter and shut down. And that was when I met a gentleman named Uncle Bob Randall, who is the listed custodial elder of Uluru. Uluru is the big rock in the center of Australia. People know it as Ayers Rock, but the real name is Uluru. And Uncle Bob and I met through a series of very magical circumstances and a lot of serendipity. And I was publishing a book and writing a book at the time, and he became somebody whose words became a part of the book. So I had an opportunity to sit down with someone from a 60,000-year-old culture, to listen to his stories, to listen to his teachings, and that returned me back to my spirituality. Because as an Aboriginal man, his spirituality is our connection to earth, is our connection to the rocks and the trees and the animals, not as a concept, but as an actual, right at this moment, living, breathing, embodied experience. And that's what had been missing for me in all those years in India, and with all these transcendental sorts of approaches, was it connected earth to heaven through the conduit of my body.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I really found my meaning, my purpose as a human. It's like all the things that had been dismantled and dismembered in my life and in my awareness suddenly just came together. And I knew that this is what I wanted to help people with. This is what I wanted, because when you come from this place of understanding your place and belonging in the kin-centric field of all of life, then you recognize what what that through line is in your life, and you start to follow that much more profoundly, with much more courage.
Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's sort of, there's many other sort of
Sure.
tangential things alongside that story, but Uncle Bob passed about 10 years ago, um, and what's manifested ultimately is a little ranch in northern New Mexico that's adjacent national forest. And I work with clients virtually. Most of my clients I work with like this on Zoom, but a lot of the clients will come and be here in person for a private retreat or some time here with the land and the horses and the neighboring indigenous peoples who surround this area, and get to remember. And I borrow that term from Resma Markham, who wrote the book My Grandmother's Hands. And he talks about remembering it's not just a remembering in our mind, a remembering of who we are and what matters to us and why we're here on planet Earth, but of coming back to our body, the member of our body, instead of being dismembered by all the incoherence out there, right? That
Yes.
we bring ourselves back embodied. What is my chest telling me? What is my stomach telling me? Where are my legs taking me? How do I
Yeah.
experience life through my body? And yeah.
So beautiful. I am such a language nerd, and it makes me think of one of my favorite etymologies, which is etymology of the word religion, religio. Ligia, we can think of like ligament, to connect, but also in the muscles, right? And it is this to remember. Religion at its core was supposed to be this thing of uh, exactly everything you just described. I don't want to try and use any other words, and the ones you used were beautiful and perfect. But I think, unfortunately, as we have seen, religion has been misused in some ways and is now a cause to forget sometimes.
Mhm.
But I love going back to that core of remembering, not just in this mental practice or even in this kind of esoteric metaphysical practice, but remembering in the body, and that we are made up of different members, right? Our arms
Yeah.
and legs, but also we are a member
Yes.
of the broader whole. We are membered and a member
Yeah. Yeah.
in
I
these
love
ways.
that. I love that. And I love the etymology of religion. I've never looked it up, and that just like lights up so many things, because isn't it fascinating that in the name of religion, we're so historically people were dismembered, right? Like
Yeah.
look at the all the the witch burnings and all these things in the name of religion, and how children are spanked, and people are shamed for their body, and it's actually the antithesis of what religion was originally intended to be.
Right.
Amazing.